what you really wanted to do. Those other contracts where you're kind of spoon-fed your directions are easy. It's the more day-to-day and smaller contracting that becomes problematic, and what should be those procedures. So I think the policy definitely helps with that. Otherwise, just wanted to mention something about ethics. I thought ethics was very important. I think that's what we're trying to embody within the policy. Very fortunately, the town has an ethics ordinance already. So what we did was fashion that to take from that language and just apply it in the procurement situation. So I think that's a very nice, I think, part of the policy. On the topic of local preference, I should say too, I came into this whole process a little bit later than the rest of the folks because of having been elected last year and starting. I think I went to my first policy meeting in January. And at that point, I just threw it out there, the local preference idea myself. And then we had more discussion, and it seemed as though others had already discussed this and, talked about the risks and benefits of it. So after my own little research and all, I've come to the conclusion that it's definitely a possibility, but that you really need to be very careful when you're constructing something like a preference, and you have to have it fit an economic development plan of some kind. So I'll give an example. This is a bit random, but City of Los Angeles in the year 2011 decides it's going to give local preference in a certain percentage, okay? But the idea there was to offset the unusually high cost of rent and insurance for local vendors. They were finding a great disparity with those not in Los Angeles. So the feeling there was to have kind of affect a certain policy by way of a procurement policy. It's kind of like using the tax code to affect a public policy. So my feeling is we need to be careful about that. There was a recent article, it was in March of 2018. There's a publication called Governing, which you may be familiar with. And the two authors, Catherine Barrett and Richard Green, discuss the pros and cons of buying local. And they point out that there's very little empirical evidence by many towns and cities, even states, and many states wrestle with, should we do this at a state level, and then therefore fight with another state. If we do it here, will Waterford fight with us? Similar to tax tariffs or whatever. But long story short, it's you have to be, I think, again, careful in how you construct this. So I'm not ultimately against it, but I think in a first go-round, my preference would be let's stay neutral and avoid the possibility of quality of products or services not being grand because of it, or perhaps increasing cost to the taxpayer because of it. And so I think it's something for maybe down the road, if we could carve out some sort of an appropriate buying local formula that actually is really advantageous. I think for me, without that empirical evidence, I would say not a grand choice, But I think that was about it. By the way, I enjoyed very much working with everyone on the committee. It was good. I think one last point about the policy. I'm very happy that it's very flexible. We need to have something in writing in the town. There's no question about that. And I think there's been a lot of best practices happening already. They're embodied in this document, and then others are added. But I don't think the policy is onerous. I don't think it's burdensome. I remember speaking at a meeting that we had with our Public Works Director and our Deputy Director about the topic of ethics, and there's nothing in here that puts any additional burden on them or anyone else in the town. So that's good. So I think between waivers, exceptions, state contracts that have their own, state or federal contracts that have their own procedures and their own sort of set of rules, that we're not asking for a lot here. It's just, let's just clean up our procedures a bit. When it comes to travel expenses, we know what they are, how you get them reimbursed, et cetera, et cetera. So, and by the way, we did look at about 10 to 12 different policies for examples, and CCM was very helpful with that. So I think this is a very good, starting point for the town, and it can be amended the way, it's your policy to adopt or not. And then, of course, if you find that whether it's buying local or some other provision you want to add later, there's no harm in that. But it's very flexible, and I think it's flexible also because it's a policy and not an ordinance for you too. It's not terribly burdensome. And that's it.
Thank you.
You're
Mark, I just
welcome.
want to add on top of that too, that
No.
this is only for the town. It's not for the Board of Education, although we recommend it. And it's not for water and sewer, as this is only affecting the town.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
good point.
Yep.
Yeah.
The Board of Education brought it up the other evening, that it does call them out a little bit, saying, please recommend it. But they don't have to. Of course, all capital projects, anything where they're coming for the appropriation process, where they come to us, they go to Board of Finance, they go to town meeting, and there's plenty of those things in the course of a year. They do have to adhere to the purchasing policy of the town. We're talking about capital. It was pointed out, the thresholds. Moving down to 25,000 from where it typically hovers around 15 right now, I think, as far as going to formal bid. Is that right, Ann? Is it 50 now where they go to formal bid?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and anything under. And we're moving it down to 25, and then there's a component, the subcommittee tried to talk me off the ledge, that there's a component for waivers, and if the first selectman sees a reason to waive, it will be allowable, and that's
Section 10.
Section 109, or,
10 waivers.
9? Is it 10 now?
well, I'm seeing, is it Section 109? Is it?
Do we have
On
a
page
number
9?
issue?
On page 9. Are you calling
Okay,
that
I
section
don't have
10?
the numbers.
I guess maybe that's
Yeah.
section 10. There's some weird numbering here, and frankly, it needs to be
Yeah.
redone
Oh,
before
yeah,
we
yeah.
adopt this.
Yeah, ours is.
The numbering was because we
Nine,
started
ours
with
10.
2. We just,
Okay.
Yeah, we probably should have this all wordsmithed, or kind of all corrected before we adopt it, because, well, maybe not.
yeah, I
Maybe
think it
we
was just the
figure it out.
numbering was
I'm
started with 2
concerned,
by
the burden being put on the first selectman, and I'm not shunning my responsibility, but I'm also not wanting to make it, sometimes it would be a daily habit of making exceptions or waivers. We do a lot of spending in this town, with a $75 million budget. There's many opportunities that we have the local contractor, and we have this job, and we know what it's gonna be, and we know it's the guy, and we use them all over town, and let's plug them in. One example came up this week. Well, when this gets adopted, we're not gonna be able to replace the roof on the police station because we gotta put out an RFP. We don't have an engineer to do that. They're cumbersome RFPs. There's a lot of detail in the work, and then we have to advertise it. Typically, they advertise even the bigger projects. And I'm just concerned that it will slow down some of the work we're doing in town, or create a need to put that engineer that we downsized back on, frankly. I already see that need now without this policy. We want to save the town money. We think by doing this, we're going to get better bids. I don't buy it. It costs the town less money, and I don't buy that either. But I also know we need a solid policy. So I'm really find myself in a place that is right in between, and I still am tonight, of saying, is this progress? Or do we have a good team that really is already utilizing the best methods possible for efficiency, because they know their money's limited and they want to get the best price out of their budgets, because they don't, They don't have a lot to spend. I know there's a legal element, there's a legal component we've been ignoring for years. I'm all for ignoring it further. Yet I also know there was a committee of really smart, dedicated people that put their best effort into it. And when I do that, when I say that, I have to side on the side of the subcommittee's recommendations. I also say that it's very tough to go back. It would be very tough to loosen up a purchasing policy. It's not politically correct to be loosening the reins. It'll be perceived wrongly, even though we may have just tightened them a little too tight. To go back and undo some of this stuff, it's going to be very difficult. So I'm very concerned about that. I'll maybe make a report back to this committee after the first year of its adoption, should we adopt this, and let you know if there's been projects that have been held up, if there's a need to bring on an extra engineer or consultant fees to have RFPs written by local engineering firms, the Fanner Group or someone else, because we can't get to them. Most of this is okay. It's the threshold part that I really struggle with. I love some of the other things that really put some definition into this, some teeth into this. I do struggle with even though the subcommittee was gracious to put that waiver in there that the first selectman and the finance director can see an opportunity that this is best for the town to waive an RFP, to waive a formal bid process, and go right to a couple local guys we call and say, hey, can you put the new roof on the police station before the winter comes? Because we're concerned about its integrity over the winter. That waiver's in there, but I also don't want to be abusing that waiver. So I'll support this as it stands. I hear you, Lisa. We had some offline conversations about the local part. I get it. In heart, we're still a village. We're still going down to Cotillo's and buying the plumbing things we need, and they're on our truck tonight. And when we don't have power at the end of a hurricane, it's Dick Gaeta in his truck going around fallen trees and delivering oil to our generators at 2 a.m. to make sure our pumps are still working to get the waste out of town, and so our sewer plants don't fail. I mean, we're still a little village, but we spend $75 million a year in that small little village, so we do need that plan. And as far as the locals go, I concur with Ann. It is a policy. We can keep tweaking it. I'm wondering, and Lisa, you also referenced maybe there's other language. We can call other places. We can get some opinions. I've talked to a few chief elected officials that wish they didn't have it, and they're stuck with it. Not to say that's not a bad idea. I wonder if some RFPs we could put in local preference. That sometimes we could put into a job that local, if it doesn't have to be policy, or it could be policy that we can opt for the local provision. Should we want to put that in? Maybe. But we can always tweak this. We can always come back. This is a public hearing. This is, someone brings something to the board, we can add it to the policy, even though we haven't done it ever before. So, other comments, other questions for the subcommittee members? Dan, you were on the subcommittee. What are some of your thoughts tonight?
Well, the problem is you've got a system that you're working with now, and there's this perceived need, which I think is correct, that you need to have a written policy that is adopted. And you don't want to destroy any efficiencies that we've already garnered in this town, and by the hard work of the people that manage the various departments. We don't want to interfere with their ability to do their job. That's the last thing we want to do. But if you're going to have a policy, policies can migrate to become ordinances. that can happen as the town becomes more complex and things get more involved, and we're seeing that. We have our own police department now. And so you probably want to have something in place that's going to pass muster if you go to that next level. And it's probably a good idea, if you're going to have to do a little more work or adjust the way you do things, probably a good idea to feel that out and see how it's going to be while it's still a policy and not an ordinance. And so I think it's important to have the parameters that we ultimately might have to live with as the town grows more. And this has flexibility. You know, you've got your waiver, there's other workarounds, but this is a way to kind of get the feel of what it's like to have a purchasing policy in a way that does have a lot of flexibility. So, and we gave a lot of thought to it, and there was a lot of concern about those limits, and there was a topic of a lot of discussion. And at the end of the day, I think we felt that, let's craft something that will pass muster down the road. And that level is but that was the feeling.
Thank you for your hard work on that subcommittee.
Mark, like you did, I struggled a little bit with the thresholds. But here again, that's something I think we can, if we find out after the first year, you can set up a time where you say, hey, we need to relook at this at various points. If 2,500 becomes a little too low of a threshold, because it doesn't take long to get to $2,500 in today's world, especially if you're going to have someone having some labor involved in installing something. So, if a little bit down the road, a year from now, we say, "Ooh, that needs to be moved up to maybe 5,000." I think that's fine. I think that those can be moving targets. To Lisa's comments, I think we'd love to see. You'd like to see businesses that are in town, succeed and so forth like that. And I think that might be the next phase to this too, looking at that. I think this is a great effort that was made by all members of the committee, the subcommittee here. It took a while, which probably it should have done. If it came out really quick, it would have shown that wasn't a lot of discussion. Mark, I think Dan, Lisa, and especially and Pete and Bill, really good job. It gave us something to start with. I think from here, we can, with something like this, you can identify, okay, we've passed something. Now, a year, 2 years down the road, okay, a few areas need to be adjusted, and I think we can do that. And I think with the waivers, I think everyone has the confidence in you to do something like that. If it has to be done, for instance, if we need a roof on the police station, you got winter coming. We saw what happened in the last torrential rains. It wasn't it was an indoor swimming pool. It wasn't a police station. That's something that we could probably understand needs to be done quickly. So
Yeah, we don't need two pools in this town.
Yeah.
They're expensive.
so anyway, I'm comfortable moving forward. I think it's a great place to start.
Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions.
You're in this business, aren't you, Mr. Daigle?
And I get to spend a little bit of money like the town does as well.
Yeah.
On page 1, it says it's applicable to all departments, boards, and commissions. Does that mean it is or is not water and sewer? Because water and sewer is a town commission.
It's not, it's its own company.
So it's not a town
It's not a
commission.
town commission. There is a water and sewer commission that
It's a separate
governs,
entity from
that
the town.
governs a separate entity, which is the water and sewer. It could be what's that other company, Arian Water, or there's other water companies that treat it
Oh,
like it's
yeah.
another company.
Yeah, like for New London and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
edited that out.
Yeah, the second paragraph of making the recommendations to the Board of Ed, to me, that shouldn't necessarily be in a policy. It should be something the first selectman and/or Board of Selectmen could send a letter to the Board of Ed saying, this is our town policy, we'd like you to, consider endorsing it. But a policy usually doesn't have recommendations in it, I don't think, but I understand the point. It just stuck out at me, is why are we putting a recommendation in the policy?
That's a good point. They also have their own plan, a
Right.
purchasing policy.
So
They do
just something to
brought
consider.
that in.
Please, these are
We did
just
make
general
these.
comments, not things that I think have to be changed.
No, I get it.
On page 5, blanket purchase orders. The way it's written, it only allows you to, unless I'm missing something, to purchase items. It doesn't allow you to purchase services. I don't see anything there about labor. A blanket purchase order with a ventilation contractor, for instance, to go address the air handling unit in the building Y broke down. It's not frequent, hopefully, that they break down, but it can, and I'm used to having blanket purchase orders where you go out to bid for it, and you get a labor cost per hour, and you also, they usually give you a 5, 10, 15% markup on material. Once again, don't want to hold this up, but especially with the lower $25,000 limit, a blanket purchase order for some of those services we need in excess of $25,000 could allow for prompt initiation of service work besides just getting paper at Staples, which I think is important. So just something to consider going
We
forward.
do that now.
Paul,
I
would-
don't know how
yeah.
that would be handled. Anna, what's your comment on that? I hate to call you, catch you off base there, but,
I see his point.
yeah.
We do go out to bid for services such as that, and we do issue blanket purchase orders for them.
As I see this policy, though, it doesn't talk about,
I think
To
it
me-
does in on-call bids,
Yes, those are.
8H, and that's an exception.
H?
Yes. Well, or 7H, because I think
just
everything's
don't know how-
renumbered. Yeah.
Numbering really needs to be reworked.
Right before
we
change
adopt
order.
this.
what page?
I think,
On-call bids, page 8 on what we have.
Okay.
so that specifically
Page
talks about services for unit price work.
To me, okay, just in my world, the blanket purchase order covers that. So, as long as it gives you the opportunity to get a service contract, that's fine. It doesn't have to be all in one place. I just wanted to make sure we weren't losing that opportunity.
Yeah, I think I know exactly, because it's unit price work for paving, curbing, drainage, trucking, trims. Like, if there's a hurricane, we have somebody on call that we have a hourly rate, which I think is what you're talking about, and they can come in, which is kind of like a blanket purchase order. I think we're calling it on-call bid here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
But
me,
do those people
somewhere in
do those people have do they have a purchase order?
Well, I mean, I think the distinction is, like, there's a blanket purchase order that you would do for small purchases, maybe not something that you would bid for. In this situation, we're actually doing an on-call bid, and then we would issue a purchase order based on the on-call bid.
But you're doing the work
What's the
before you
difference-
get the purchase order.
No, you would do, since you've gone out to bid, you have a bid for that type of work.
Okay.
You have,
So it's also an open
correct.
purchase order. I
So
see.
you place the purchase order based on a competitive bid for whatever the service may be, and then you, as needed, execute authorization against that purchase order, on-call bid or purchase order or blanket purchase order,
Yeah.
and you go get the service provided. And that's what you really need, and as long as
Right.
that provides for that, that's fine.
So it's more for services as opposed to hard
Sure.
items. Yeah.
And
So-
on the blanket order, for instance, paper, do you have separate line items for separate departments, or do you just handle that accounting-wise, that I have one department needs this much paper, another department needs that, and maybe it's pieces and parts, but would a blanket purchase order for purchase material cover more than one department?
So, each department does their own, purchase order for supplies. And so,
One thing to consider going forward is a single purchase order for the town for paper supplies, and then individual, the way you don't have to place 5, 6 departments worth of purchase orders. You place one, and then you authorize by line item as someone needs something. Please, I'm not trying to turn your world upside down, it's just, as we look to, minimize purchase orders, that's one way to do it, where a blanket purchase order can go out. You do have to account for which department it's going to, separately, of course, but you need to do that with the individual blanket purchase orders anyway, so. Another thing to consider for future considerations is allowing a blanket purchase order to be longer than a year, but only gets funded on a yearly basis, based on what the budget is. So you're not writing those POs every year. You're out there, and once they give you a quote, that their quote's good for more than 1 year, for whatever the commodity is that they're providing, then each year you can fund it. Line item 1 will fund it for year 1. Line item 2 funds it for year 2, so that you don't get yourself over a budget. It could reduce the number of purchase orders you have to place.
It doesn't work with the way the accounting system works,
And
Well, we're gonna change that too. We're gonna,
I'm trying to save money, not cost
the
money.
next
New subcommittee?
Yeah, you just volunteered yourself.
No.
Sorry, really happy with that one.
Oh, yeah.
On page
Okay.
7, top paragraph, short form bid package, is there a standard form for that? Or is that created each and every time you need to go out for 10,000 to 25,000 purchase order? If there is a standard form, it might be worth including it as an attachment. Don't know if you have a standard form, but it'll at least make it uniform for everything you want. Now, you can't do that with bid packages, because you're bidding different things, but potentially give the basics of what need to be included. Yeah, page 7 at the first paragraph. The
Oh, okay.
second line says a short firm bid package should be used.
Got it.
And not to prolong anyone's agony, I'm confused on the waiver paragraph. It says waivers shall be permitted only if necessary, only if in the interest of the town. To this end, the Board of Selectmen may waive quote or bid requirements if the waiver cannot be avoided. And the suspension of requirements would well serve the town needs. Further, a department request for a waiver of a dollar threshold shall be allowed upon the approval of the first selectman and finance director. What's the difference? When would the Board of Selectmen need to waive it? And when would the first selectman and finance director need to approve it?
That's a good point. The Board of Selectmen don't meet regularly enough to handle those things. Of course, the agenda's out a week beforehand, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know why the Board of Selectmen would be involved with that.
I think it
Someone on the
gives,
committee?
well, I think it gave 2 outs. One, you could have the Board of Selectmen do it if it's a long-term thing. For example, you mentioned a roof. Or,
As an example.
that's an example, if there's a little
Yeah.
more time, or the first selectman and finance director can do it. It was to provide maximum flexibility. That's my, yeah.
I think Mark is correct on that. I think in terms of the rationale for it,
Okay.
and then sometimes the department heads have approached on the topic, and it may not be particularly serious or onerous in some way, and so the feeling was the first selectman and finance director can deal with that without having it go through board of selectmen.
Yeah, it's, the second requirement says it shall go through the first selectman and finance. The first says it may be waived by the Board of Selectmen. It doesn't say it has to be waived by the Board of Selectmen. But to me, do you want the Board of Selectmen involved with the waivers of this policy or not? I would think it would happen infrequently, and I think without defining when it has to be involved with the Board of Selectmen, it really doesn't carry any weight.
True. True, because I'm either gonna do it, or if
You're
I
gonna do
don't
it,
feel
you're
comfortable doing it, I'm just gonna say, go to the RFP. If I don't wanna put my name on that, I'm probably not even gonna bring it to you. I'm gonna say, why bother, let's go to the RFP, because why would I put you on the hook, if I'm not comfortable with it?
If I could point out that in that, let me just.
Yeah, please, might as well, put your comments on
I
record.
think it's a language issue, because the clause reads that the Board of Selectmen may waive, hang on one second, quote or bid requirements, and it's a conditional sentence, if the waiver cannot be avoided. It's just a conditional phrasing, so it's giving you that option, but you have to have that second part happening. If the waiver cannot be avoided and the suspension of requirements would serve the needs of the town. So it's basically it's just saying, and so in all these circumstances,
another
it's all
route.
conditional. And then the second circumstance where you have some sort of a waiver if there is a department request, that it shall be allowed, it's the sort of future tense. It will happen if the other things happen first. So it's really a language, a way of expressing oneself, let's say, and I don't think there's anything substantively at issue with it.
Can the latter happen without the first?
No,
It
I mean,
does.
there's definitely a conditional sentence. Let's look at that first one with the Board of Selectmen. They can have a waiver if the rest of the requirements are met. If the waiver can't be avoided and the suspension would serve the needs of the town.
I understand that.
Yeah, so I mean, just basically what's happening in these sentences is just conditional circumstance. So there's nothing forcing you by any means to have a waiver, or forcing first selectman and finance director to waive, to make a waiver should there, just because they're being asked. I mean, there's definitely